In Proverbs 14, verses 18 to 35, the contrasts are between the good and evil, the rich and the poor, and the wise and the foolish. And did you notice the language about royalty in this section? In verse 18, he mentions being crowned. In verse 24, he mentions the crown of the wise. In verse 28, he mentions a king's glory. And in verse 35, he mentions a king showing favor to the wise. So I think it's helpful to remind ourselves Solomon is speaking to his son, who is meant to be an heir to the throne. So Proverbs is royal wisdom given to the son of the king. And we may think, well, what does that have to do with me? I mean, I'm not an heir to the throne. Well, remember, God in the very beginning created us to be co-rulers with him over creation. And so Proverbs is showing us how to reign over God's creation the way Adam and Eve were supposed to in the garden. God designed us to rule over this world in wisdom. And every problem we face in life, and even the curse of sin itself, is a result of ruling over this world in a foolish way. And so in today's reading, the overall counsel is that a true king is crowned by his kind service to others. In verse 18, a true king is not naive about the world or about the needs of the people around him. He is sensible and he understands what's going on around him. And so he's crowned with knowledge about the right way to rule. And because of it, even wicked people recognize the wisdom of his rulership, and they come and bow down before him, and they sit at his gate, submitting themselves to his good judgment. And a true king does not treat the poor with disdain. He knows most people don't care about the poor because the poor can't do anything for them in return. And yet most people love the rich, not because they're true friends, but because they're just using the rich. But a true king shows no partiality and does not treat people based on what they can do for him, but rather what he can do for them. In fact, rather than hating his neighbor in verse 21, he's gracious to the poor. He takes care of those in need. And he treats people in verse 22 with kindness and truth, and he actually devises good on their behalf. He talks about the crafty scheming of evil people in the first part of verse 22, and a true king should be equally crafty in the opposite direction, toward helping people and doing good for the people in his kingdom. A true king works hard, verse 23. He doesn't just talk about what he's going to do to help people, he actually does it. And because of his wise rulership in verse 24, he's blessed with success and material riches, whereas when fools reign, their kingdom falls apart. A true king is a fair judge in verse 25, and he can discern between liars and those telling the truth. And he fears the Lord in verses 26 and 27. So he has strong confidence that God will be with him and continue to bless his kingdom. In fact, because of his kind leadership in verse 28, he's got a huge following in his kingdom. But some rulers are so wicked and foolish, they have no one to rule over because everyone abandons them. A true king is slow to anger, and he doesn't lash out at people and fly off the handle. No, his heart, verse 30, is at peace, and he's not overcome with jealousy and envy about other kings and their kingdoms. He's perfectly content with what God has blessed him with, and he never oppresses the poor and needy in verse 31. He's gracious to them. He's kind. He does what he can to help lift other people up around him instead of just lifting up himself. And he punishes evildoers in verse 32. He thrusts them down because of their wrongdoing, and he rewards the righteous. And everyone can tell that he's a wise ruler in verse 33 because what's in someone's heart is eventually revealed by their actions over time. And they can tell by this king's kindness and grace to the needy and ruling in righteousness and putting down the wicked and exalting what is good, that he is truly wise, whereas fools also make themselves known, and it becomes clear very quickly that there's a fool on the throne. And a true king leads his people in righteousness, verse 34. He inspires people and leads people in following God and his law, and he shows favor toward people who act wisely, and he cuts off the shameful in his kingdom. And so the challenge for us is to remember we are all sons and daughters of the king. That's what it means to be made in the image of God. We are supposed to be reflections of his rulership and authority in the world by the way that we live, and we are co-rulers with him over creation. And I understand we may not have a kingdom in the typical sense of the word, but technically everything we touch is part of the kingdom that we have been put in charge by God to rule over. So if you are a parent, your kingdom is your household. If you're an employee or a boss, your kingdom is your company. If you're a member of the church is your kingdom. And yes, I understand that sounds a little odd because of course Jesus is the true king, but he has entrusted us to help rule with him on his behalf, to reign over the responsibilities in our life in a way that reflects his righteousness. So if you want to be crowned with honor as king over the kingdom entrusted to you by the Lord, the key is our kind service to others. That is the hallmark of true kingship in Scripture. It's not about exalting ourselves or having everyone else serve us. No, we kneel in humility and we reach down to help lift people up around us and sacrifice our time and our energy and our money for their well-being. And of course, this points to Christ. He came to show us exactly what it looks like to rule in the image of God. And the disciples did not understand true kingship in God's sight. They were constantly arguing over who would be the greatest in the kingdom, who would be crowned with honor and glory. And Jesus told them in Matthew 20, in verses 25 to 28, that true greatness in my kingdom is not about lording your authority over others and dropping the hammer and telling everyone else what to do because you're on a power trip. He says it is not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus understood a true king is crowned by his kind service to others. And Jesus showed no partiality to the rich, and he had no disdain for the poor. Instead, he was gracious to the poor and needy, not just to the physically poor and needy, but especially to the spiritually poor and needy. And he came to reign in righteousness and to exalt the nation of his people because of it. All of us had disgraced our kingdom because we ruled over creation in sin. And yet Jesus, because of the gift of his righteousness, can exalt us anyway if we, as the evil rulers, will come and bow before him. And when we do, he will help us to be rulers like him. So as we call on God for wisdom, our prayer today is, Father, help me rule over the kingdoms you've entrusted me with in a way that brings you honor and glory, in a way that doesn't make me the center of attention and that doesn't ask what everyone else around me can do for me, but rather what I can do for everyone else around me. Help me be like your Son, the perfect King, and to give my life in kind service to others, the way you, my King, kindly served me.